Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. I'm excited to have you here as we explore the fascinating world of population dynamics. Our topic is population fluctuations, carrying capacity, regulation of population, density stabilizing, density-independent factors, density-dependent factors, predation, and foraging. Over the next few slides, we'll dive into how populations grow and fluctuate, what keeps them in balance, and the different factors that influence their stability. So, let's get started and uncover the key concepts behind population regulation and survival strategies. Let's talk about population fluctuation today. When we look at wild animals, it's important to understand that their populations don't just steadily decline or increase over time. Instead, they tend to go through natural ups and downs. This fluctuation is a normal part of their existence. The reasons behind these changes are quite complex but fascinating. They can be influenced by biotic factors, which involve living things like food availability, predation, and disease. On the other hand, abiotic factors, non-living elements like climate, weather, and habitat conditions, also play a crucial role. Understanding these fluctuations helps us see that population dynamics are not just random, but are shaped by a variety of interconnected factors. And recognizing this is key to understanding how ecosystems function and how we can better protect wild animals in their natural environments. Let's take a closer look at the factors that affect wildlife populations. First, we have biotic factors, which are related to living things. These include natural deaths caused by aging, competition for resources, outbreaks of disease, forest fires, and flash floods. All of these are natural processes that can lead to the decline of animal populations, but they are a normal part of ecological balance. On the other hand, abiotic factors are non-living influences, and here we're talking about unnatural causes of death. These are often linked to human activities, such as accidents on roads and rail tracks or other unintentional incidents. For example, animals getting hit by vehicles or trapped in machinery. Now, it's important to highlight that some human-induced deaths are intentional. This includes the poaching or killing of wild animals. People often do this for monetary gain, like hunting for profit, or to obtain animal protein. Sometimes, animals are killed as a form of retaliation, especially when they threaten crops or livestock. Connecting all these points to the overall theme, understanding these factors helps us see the complex challenges faced by wildlife. It highlights the importance of managing both natural and human-made threats to ensure the survival of species in their natural habitats. Let's talk about carrying capacity. This is a key concept in understanding how populations grow and stabilize. The carrying capacity of a biological species in an environment is essentially the maximum number of individuals that the environment can support indefinitely. It's determined by the available resources like food, habitat, water, and other necessities. When the population reaches this level, the environment can sustain it without degradation over the long term. As the population density increases, that is, as more individuals occupy the space, the birth rate often goes up because there are more reproductive individuals. At the same time, the death rate tends to decrease since resources are still sufficient to meet the needs of most individuals. The difference between these two rates, the birth rate and the death rate, is what we call the natural increase. Understanding this helps us see how populations grow and what factors eventually limit that growth. It ties directly into our overall theme of how ecosystems maintain balance by adjusting population sizes to fit the environment's capacity. So, here we see that the carrying capacity refers to the maximum number of individuals an environment can support without causing significant negative impacts on the organisms or the environment itself. It's like a limit that keeps things balanced. A key concept here is the regulating factor, which is what helps maintain this balance by keeping the population size at or near that carrying capacity. When the population exceeds this limit, it tends to decrease, and this decline can happen for various reasons depending on the species. Sometimes, it's because there's not enough space, food, or sunlight, things that are essential for survival. Understanding these dynamics is crucial because it helps us grasp how populations grow, stabilize, or decline over time, which ties back into the bigger picture of how ecosystems function and are maintained. Let's talk about regulation of populations. Population regulation refers to how populations fluctuate in abundance over time, and this is often driven by feedback mechanisms that either increase or decrease population density. Ecologists are really interested in identifying patterns in how populations change, and then they test these ideas through experiments. They might alter certain factors they think influence population size, and then observe what happens. A key concept here is that when a population exceeds its average size, it tends to decline back toward that average. Conversely, when the population drops below the average, it usually tends to grow again. This balancing act helps maintain population stability over time. Understanding these feedback mechanisms is crucial because it ties into the broader theme of how ecosystems self-regulate and maintain balance. When we look at the relationship between density and mortality, you'll notice that sometimes the data points are spread out quite a bit around the trend line. This large spread indicates that the connection isn't very tight. In other words, if the data points are all over the place, it becomes much harder to accurately predict how much mortality will increase as density goes up. This is what we call density stabilizing. It essentially means that density alone doesn't have a strong predictive power in these cases. The reason is that mortality isn't influenced by density in isolation. There are other factors at play. So, as the spread of data points increases, our confidence in using density as a predictor decreases. It highlights an important point in our overall theme, that predicting mortality requires considering multiple factors, not just density. This helps us understand the limits of relying solely on density when trying to anticipate mortality outcomes. Let's talk about density independence. This concept means that population size can change without being affected by how dense the population is. In other words, if the factor causing the change doesn't depend on how many individuals are around, then the population can grow or decline regardless of density. For example, winter cold can cause organisms to freeze to death, and this can happen in a density-dependent way or a density-independent way. When we say it's density-independent, it means each organism reacts individually to the cold. Some animals can tolerate lower temperatures than others, so the key factor here isn't the number of animals, but the lowest temperature they experience. In this case, the actual temperature is what determines mortality rates, not how many animals are present. It's a reminder that some environmental factors impact populations independently of their density, and understanding this helps us better grasp how populations respond to different environmental stresses. Let's talk about the factors that regulate population size. Population ecologists typically divide these factors into two main categories: density-dependent and density-independent factors. Now, density-independent factors are things like weather and climate. These affect the same proportion of individuals in a population, no matter how big or small that population is. So, whether you have a small group or a large one, a storm or a drought will impact everyone more or less equally. On the other hand, many populations are influenced by both types of factors at the same time. It's important to recognize that the dynamics of population size are rarely driven by just one factor. Instead, they're shaped by a complex interplay between density-dependent factors, like competition for resources, and density-independent factors, like environmental conditions. This understanding helps us see how populations grow, fluctuate, or decline over time, which ties back to our overall theme of understanding ecological balance. Density-dependent factors refer to how the environment's variation affects organisms differently depending on their population density. Imagine the environment as having warm spots and cold spots. These are the refugia where organisms can overwinter safely. The choice of where an organism overwinters is crucial because it directly influences their chances of surviving the cold. Now, when the population density is high, those refugia tend to be full, meaning many organisms are left out in the colder, less protected areas. This increases the likelihood that cold will cause more deaths among the population. Conversely, when the density is low, there's enough space in the refugia for everyone, reducing the impact of cold temperatures on survival. This concept highlights how population density and environmental heterogeneity work together to influence survival rates, which is a key part of understanding species dynamics and overall ecosystem health. It's a great example of how environmental factors and population pressures are interconnected, especially when considering how organisms adapt and survive through seasonal changes. Let's talk about density-dependent regulatory factors. These are factors that change as the population density increases. Specifically, they tend to increase mortality rates or decrease fecundity when populations become crowded. What this means is that as more individuals are present, resources become limited, competition intensifies, and these factors kick in to slow down population growth. Eventually, these regulatory effects reach a point where the population's growth rate stabilizes. At this point, the death rate and the birth rate balance each other out. So the population is neither growing nor declining, it's in a state of equilibrium. This balance is crucial for understanding how populations are regulated naturally. In the bigger picture, recognizing these density-dependent factors helps us understand the dynamics of population stability and how ecosystems maintain balance over time. Key factor analysis can actually be a useful tool to detect whether a factor is density-dependent. What we do is simply graph the key factor, like larval mortality, against the log of the population size at that stage. So, for example, we might look at how larval mortality changes as larval density increases. The most important thing to remember here is the slope of that graph. If the slope is positive, it indicates that higher densities lead to greater mortality. That is a clear sign that the factor is density dependent. This kind of analysis helps us understand whether the population regulation is happening through density-dependent mechanisms, which is a key theme in understanding population dynamics overall. So, by examining these relationships, we can better identify what influences mortality rates and how populations may self-regulate as they grow. Let's talk about predation. Predation is an interaction between species where one species, the predator, uses another species, the prey, as food. It's a crucial process in ecosystems because it directly influences which species thrive and how they are distributed across different environments. Predation plays a major role in shaping the diversity and abundance of species within ecological communities. When predation is successful, we typically see the predator's population increase because they get the resources they need to reproduce and survive. Conversely, the prey population tends to decrease because they are being consumed. This dynamic is fundamental to understanding how ecosystems maintain balance and regulate species populations over time. These effects on the prey population don't just stay isolated. They can actually ripple out through the entire ecological community. What that means is, changes in one species can indirectly influence others, often in unexpected ways. One clear example of this is what's called a trophic cascade. As the name suggests, a trophic cascade happens when the effects of predation cascade down the food chain, ultimately impacting species that aren't directly eaten by the predator. So, for instance, if a predator reduces the number of herbivores, plants might flourish because they're less grazed upon. This interconnectedness really highlights how complex and dynamic ecosystems are, and it ties back to our overall theme of understanding predator-prey relationships and their broader ecological impacts. Let's talk about predation and how it affects population dynamics. In many cases, predation plays a significant role in determining the population sizes of both predators and prey. When the prey population increases, it provides more food for predators, which often leads to a rise in the predator population as well. Conversely, as the predator population grows, the increased predation pressure tends to cause the prey population to decline. This creates a natural balancing act between the two. Understanding this relationship is key to grasping how populations fluctuate over time and how ecosystems maintain stability. It highlights the interconnected nature of species within a community and underscores the importance of predation in shaping population trends. So, when one species responds to a change in another, it's important to remember that this response takes time. For example, if prey numbers increase, predators don't immediately follow suit. Their populations need time to grow in response. Because of this lag, predator-prey interactions often lead to what we call population cycles. These are patterns where both predator and prey populations go through regular ups and downs. What's really interesting is that these cycles are out of phase with each other. That means, when prey populations reach a peak, predator populations are usually still growing, but haven't peaked yet. Conversely, when predator numbers are at their highest, prey populations might already be declining. This cyclical dynamic highlights how tightly linked these populations are and underscores the complex, time-dependent nature of predator-prey relationships. It also ties back to the overall theme of ecological balance, showing how populations can fluctuate in response to each other over time. All right, let's talk about predation and how it affects species richness. Predation can be a bit of a double-edged sword. It can either boost the number of species that coexist or reduce it, depending on certain factors. For example, the environment's favorability plays a big role, as does the competitive status of the prey species they target. A key concept here is the keystone predator. This is a predator that feeds on a prey species that's often highly competitive and dominant in the community. By doing so, it prevents that species from taking over completely, which actually helps maintain a diverse community. So, in essence, predation isn't just about reducing prey numbers. It can also promote biodiversity by controlling dominant species and opening up space for others to thrive. This connects directly to our overall theme of understanding how interactions shape community structure and diversity. So, continuing from where we left off, let's look at what happens when a keystone predator reduces the abundance of what we call the dominant prey. By doing so, the predator actually releases the less competitive prey from being suppressed by that dominant species. This is a really crucial point, because it shows how predators can structure communities not just by controlling prey populations, but by maintaining a balance that allows multiple species to coexist. What this means is that keystone predation, or predator-mediated coexistence, actually increases the overall number of prey species that can live together in a community. Without predation, the dominant prey might outcompete others, leading to less diversity. But with these predators around, more species can survive and thrive because they're not all competing directly with the strongest competitor. So, in the big picture, this concept highlights how predators play a vital role in fostering biodiversity. They help maintain a variety of species that might otherwise be pushed out. It's a fascinating example of how predation shapes community structure, and it ties back to our overall theme of understanding the complex interactions that sustain healthy ecosystems. Predation acts as a powerful force of natural selection. What this means is that predators with certain traits that make them more successful at catching prey are more likely to survive and pass on those traits. Over time, this drives the evolution of predator features that help them capture or feed on prey more effectively. For example, sharper claws, better speed, or stealth could all be advantageous traits. At the same time, prey species are also evolving in response. They develop traits that improve their ability to escape, hide, or deter predators altogether. Think of faster running speeds, camouflage, or defensive behaviors. So overall, predation pushes both predators and prey to adapt and evolve in a continuous arms race. This dynamic is a key part of how natural selection shapes the diversity of life we see in ecosystems. It highlights the interconnected nature of these evolutionary pressures and how they drive the development of specialized traits. Predators, as we've seen throughout this presentation, are incredibly diverse and have developed a wide range of techniques to successfully catch and subdue their prey. Some predators rely on stealth and speed, while others use powerful attacks or specialized tools. On the flip side, prey animals aren't passive. They've evolved their own set of defenses to escape predators or make themselves less appealing. These defenses can be physical, like armor or spines, or behavioral, such as hiding, fleeing, or even mimicking other dangerous animals. What's fascinating is how this ongoing evolutionary arms race shapes the behaviors and adaptations we see in ecosystems. It's a continuous cycle of predator strategies and prey defenses, which ultimately drives biodiversity and complex interactions. This dynamic really highlights the interconnectedness of all these species and their adaptations, reinforcing the theme that evolution is a constant battle for survival. Let's talk about foraging, which is a fascinating area within behavioral ecology. Essentially, foraging theory examines how animals behave when they search for and collect food in their specific environments. It helps us understand the choices animals make based on the resources available to them. A key part of this theory is considering the payoff, or the benefit, that an animal gets from different foraging options. For example, some food sources might be easier to find but less nutritious, while others could be harder to access but more rewarding. The theory predicts that animals should favor foraging strategies that give them the highest payoff. In other words, they'll tend to choose options that maximize their fitness or their chances of survival and reproduction. By understanding these behaviors, we can see how animals adapt their foraging strategies to optimize their energy intake and overall fitness. This concept ties back to the broader theme of how animals balance their needs with environmental constraints to thrive. In 1966, Robert MacArthur, J. M. Emlen, and Eric Pionka independently proposed what we now call the optimal foraging theory. This was a significant development because it offered a way to predict how animals should behave when searching for food. The core idea is that foraging is so crucial to an individual's survival that natural selection should favor behaviors that maximize food intake. This theory suggests that we can use decision theory, think of it as a kind of logical framework, to understand and predict the choices an optimal forager would make. An optimal forager, in this context, is an animal with perfect knowledge of its environment and how to get the most food with the least effort. By understanding this idealized behavior, we can better grasp how real animals make foraging decisions and how those decisions impact their survival and reproductive success. This concept ties directly into the overall theme of how animals adapt their behaviors to optimize their chances of survival in their environments. There are actually many versions of optimal foraging theory, each relevant to different foraging situations. One important version is patch selection theory. This explains how a forager behaves when prey is concentrated in small areas, and there's a significant amount of travel time between these patches. So, the forager has to decide when it's worth it to stay in a patch or move on to the next one, balancing the energy gained with the costs of traveling. Another key version is central place foraging theory. This applies when the forager has to return to a specific location, like a nest or den, to consume, hoard, or feed its food to mates or offspring. It's all about optimizing the routes and decisions involved in bringing resources back to that central point. These theories help us understand different foraging strategies, and they connect to the broader theme of how animals maximize their energy intake efficiently in various environments. This slide doesn't contain enough information. That's why we're moving to the next slide.